Good morning, everybody. We'll make a start. It's, I think, close to 11 o'clock. My name's Dean Harris. I'm the president of the Mosman branch of the Labor Party. That sounds like an oxymoron for many people, but there is, in fact, a very strong, vibrant Labor branch that operates locally in this area. And we, along with Susan Moylan-Coombs and others who have been involved in organising this, are very pleased to invite you today to hear from two important speakers, Burney, who I'll introduce formally before Linda speaks, and Edward Synot. Just a few housekeeping things before we get underway. If anybody needs to use the bathroom, they're actually located to my left, around the corner of the building here, out the back. Obviously, in the current circumstances as far as coronavirus and the like, we've provided some sanitising material for you. We've got some disinfectant wipes and so on if you feel the need to clean your hands at any point in time. And we've also asked, as you might have received in an email yesterday, to refrain from unusual forms of social greeting, of handshaking and other forms of social touching. So I'm sure everybody's fully aware of those things, and I think despite the fact that we're living in these fairly unprecedented times, that it's terrific that you've still found your way here this morning. I firstly would like personally to acknowledge that this morning we meet on the lands of the Borragagal and Camaragal people, the original custodians of this land. And in fact, some of you might be aware that in 1992 there was an archaeological excavation of a cave near Balmoral Beach, which was a midden where people had gathered and congregated for many years and shared food and stories and community with each other. And the carbon dating of some of the artefacts that were found in that cave date back to about 3,800 years ago. So we actually are meeting in a place that has been inhabited by our first Australians for millennia. And it is a significant place, not only for that reason. On the 28th of January in 1788, one of the first encounters of the First Fleet were with local Indigenous people, in fact, around Bradley's Head. And Bradley's Head is named after Lieutenant William Bradley, who actually documented those encounters. And he said of those first encounters that the people waved to them from the shore and invited them to actually land. And when they did land, that they were greeted with good humour and friendliness, unarmed. And so those first interactions with the people of this place were incredibly positive and welcoming and warm. And it's at that point in time, it's estimated that there were about 3,500 Indigenous people that lived in and around Sydney Harbour. And within 50 years of those first greetings, that number was only about 300. So it's a very uncomfortable truth that over that period of time, from 1788 to even today, that the prosperity of our nation has been built upon, if you like, the colonisation of a country that was not asked for, that was not requested, and resulted in incredible loss and suffering of our First Nations people. And in some ways, the Uluru Statement is a great opportunity, in my view, for us to take a very positive step toward actually recognising those uncomfortable truths and building a nation that actually embraces, acknowledges, nurtures, and gives Indigenous people a true voice in the way that this country moves forward. So I think it's a really important document for those reasons, and really important that we keep the conversation about the Uluru Statement alive when there are many other competing issues and concerns that might occupy the mind of our friends and neighbours and other people in our society. And so that was really the motivation for the team that have actually put this event together today, to keep that conversation alive and to actually hopefully encourage you to keep that conversation alive with the people in your own social circles. Now, enough from me. I'd like to ask Susan Moylan-Coombs to do an official acknowledgement of country. Susan is somebody that I met through the course of the last federal election. We were co-candidates for the seat of Warringah, both unsuccessful co-candidates, hence we're standing here today. But I developed a great affection and fondness for Susan through that period of time, and I really consider her to be a very good friend now. So Susan, would you like to pay respects?
It's interesting how campaigns can bring people together, and I too would like to acknowledge Dean, because we did become good friends, and so into the future we will do good things for the community in our capacities collaboratively, which I think is important. So I'd like to start by saying Warami, Nagaya Susan, Nagaya Grinjiwawunga, Gumida Bayanga, Gumida Wayangra, Madamarong Tianaga Anaga, Madamarong Bayalia, Kamaragal, Gamaragal, Guri Pemel. So what I said was, hello, I'm Susan, I'm Grinjiwawunga. In honour, I ask permission of the spirits of this place, the male spirits, the female spirits, to be able to walk and talk on the land of the Camaragal people who are part of the Gamaragal group. So I would like to honour Professor Dennis Foley, who is the traditional custodian, the knowledge holder, the elder for this region. And he's not honoured enough, and he taught me those words, and he sent me forth to speak language from this land, because it's not my language, it's a part of the Sydney language. And to speak language is to speak to who we are and our identity and where we come from. And so I want to honour Dennis, I want to honour these wonderful speakers who are going to inform you today about, what the Uluru Statement means to us as First Nations people, as the original people of this land. And we are the oldest living culture on the planet, and that's something to celebrate. And with those of you who have come after, it is about how we move forward in that truth-telling and living together, hopefully in harmony in this place. And so, as Dean said, this was the place of first destruction, and people right at those beginning moments were being friendly towards each other. And I think that if we can maintain that spirit of being friendly human beings to work out and finish the unfinished business, so we can truly move forward. So thank you.
Now it's my great honour to introduce to you this morning our first speaker, the Honourable Linda Burney, the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Families and Social Services. Linda is a proud Wiradjuri woman, and I think you grew up in Leeton or around Leeton in the western parts of the state, which is an area that I visit from time to time because my wife's from Griffith, so I've actually been to Whitton a few times. Linda, as many of you may know, spent a period of time representing as a representative in the New South Wales Parliament before becoming the member for Barton, and I think that was about 2016, so around about 4 years ago. And I actually attended the national conference, the Labor National Conference in Adelaide of last year, and one of the highlights for me was a moment where Linda and Senator Pat Dodson and Senator Malandiri McCarthy actually presented Labor's Reconciliation Action Plan, which was actually the first political party to actually have developed a Reconciliation Action Plan. And it was a terrific moment, and I think a signifier of Labor's commitment to actually not only reconciliation, but actually really embracing Indigenous people, Indigenous culture, and the way that we think and the way that we act and behave as organisations moving forward. So, Linda, thank you for coming this morning, and I'd like to hand over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dean, for that introduction, but most particularly thanks to Susan for the honour of listening to you. What we experienced with Susan's acknowledgement was incredibly precious. Hearing Sydney language spoken so beautifully is such a rare and wonderful thing to have heard. So I join with Susan in recognising the Camaragal people and the Buragagal, is that right? And I don't know Dennis, but thank you for reminding us about where our beliefs should be. And thank you to Ivy. Where are you, Ivy? For giving me that glass of water. I think you're the youngest person in the room, and hopefully what I can share with you this morning is helpful. Can I also recognise Eddie, who's going to speak after me? It's his birthday today. Which I'm sure I'm not supposed to tell you, but his wife is in Brisbane and she's not happy. So we've got to make him happy today. Can I also, I know that Rose Jackson's going to join us in a little while. I want to thank Liz Kirby, who's one of my staff members, for being here today, and also a person who lived in Neutral Bay, so she drove us, thank heavens. So thank you, Liz, for that. The other thing is that there are many familiar faces from the reconciliation movement here today, and it's wonderful to see you all. So thank you all for being here. One of the things that I want to do a couple of things today. I think it's important that we have a conversation and want to leave enough time for questions and comments and thoughts, not speeches, but comments and thoughts, and also share with you, I think, where things are at in terms of the Uluru Statement from a very realistic point of view, and also, importantly, hear from you and leave with you things that we can all do to actually make a difference in terms of this discussion. And thank you to Mosman ALP. I know that it is a very vibrant branch and you've been very patient in getting me here. So really what I wanted to do was unpack everyone the Uluru Statement, explore with you what I think the time frame that we've got collectively for delivering this thing to the Australian people, but also give you a sense of where things are at from my perspective. So I always, when I'm coming to another place that I haven't been before, I always try and find out a little bit about the local history. And one of the most inspiring people from the Australian story was a Camaragal woman, Barangaroo. And I think of all the people that inspire me, that I like to think about, it is Barangaroo, her spirit, her tenacity, her skill as a fisherwoman, and the fact that she didn't take any crap was pretty good. So I do particularly think of Barangaroo this morning, and I know that people in this room also think of her as well. Of course, she was the second wife of Bennelong, and I was in Balmain the other day for, I don't know why I was in Balmain, but I was there, and I drove down to the end of Darling Street, where you've just got Memel in front of you, the island that Barangaroo and Bennelong spent a lot of time on. I just thought, wow, that's just extraordinary. And the fact that she must have been a very a woman of high standing, because she had, unlike most women from that period, her nose was pierced, her septum was pierced, and that signified that she was a woman of great regard. So we remind ourselves of Barangaroo. And of course, the story of the Camaragal people is such an important story in the Australian story. And one of the things, of course, that you both referred to with the Uluru Statement was that process of national truth-telling, which I'll talk about in a little while. So does that sound like a reasonable way to go? And I promise I won't talk for too long, and I won't kiss you or touch you. And I noticed that there was some paper hand towels out there. I might take those with me, because there aren't many over in Marrickville, I can tell you that. But I do have a secret stash of where you can buy toilet paper if you're interested. But most importantly, I think the thing that we need to explore collectively of people sharing this country is what the time frame is politically, and what the Uluru Statement is asking of us as Australians. And I know that many of you are familiar with this, but let me go through it. So the Uluru Statement is an elegant statement. You have it there in your program. And it's asking three things of us. It's asking for a constitutionally enshrined voice of Aboriginal people to advise the Parliament, now this is really important, to advise the Parliament on issues that pertain to First Nations people. That's the first thing it asks of us. Now, why does it do that? And many of you are of the vintage where you'll remember the demise of ATSIC and the demise of many Aboriginal organisations that have been established to advise at a federal level or to deliver programs at a federal level. All legislative bodies that could be gotten rid of and have been gotten rid of by successive governments. So that's the first thing. The second thing it's asking is for the establishment of a Makarrata Commission. Now, Makarrata is a new word for agreement making, or it's a new word for coming together after a disagreement. And Makarrata Commission is really code for treaty. And that's really important to remember as well. So they're the two things. And the third thing, which is, I think, the thing that we can do the most about of people in this room today, and many of you have been doing this for 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years anyhow, and that's a national process of truth-telling. So they're the three elegant things that we've been asked to consider out of the Uluru Statement. Is that kind of clear? So we've got that sitting here. The party that I'm a member of, and I think most fair-minded Australians endorse and believe and accept the Uluru Statement. And Labor's position is that we accept all three parts of the Uluru Statement, and that's how we're moving forward. Now, let me tell you what the political reality has boiled down to. The political reality has boiled down to this, is none of the aspects outlined in the Uluru Statement are currently what is being considered by the Australian government. They want to have a referendum, although the Prime Minister has stopped talking about it, that will recognise First Peoples in the Constitution, which is very different to a constitutionally enshrined voice. And the Prime Minister has said that he wants to do that in this term of government. Now hold on to that, because that's a very important part of what I'm describing. The second aspect is that the Makarrata Commission or agreement making is completely off the table. Absolutely off the table. And there is some vague notion of a national process of truth-telling which is so ill-defined that I don't believe it's a reality. So when you think about where we are, everyone, in the political timetable, the next election is going to be in the first half of 2022. What the government seems to have agreed to as an aspiration is a legislated voice, not to the Parliament, but a legislated voice to the government. None of what Uluru is about. So that is where we're at. But when you think about it, and I know some of you came to the Frank Walker memorial lecture that I gave, we are 5 minutes to midnight. in this. Because if there is going to be a referendum on recognising First People into the Constitution, no legal framework, but just a recognition, then there has to be legislation gotten through the Parliament at the latest this year on that. I don't reckon Parliament's going back next term, but that's another issue. And then there has to be once that legislation is taken through the Parliament, if it got through the Parliament, then a referendum has to be held within 6 months of the legislation. That's the law. That's what's in the Constitution. So therefore, there would have to be a national referendum in the first part of next year. Okay? So, and if there is going to be a legislative body created, then that's a second piece of legislation. And we know that the longest debate ever held in the Australian Parliament was the establishment of ATSIC. And you cannot tell me that there is not a sizable case, a group of people within the Parliament at the moment that would do everything to not allow that to happen. So what I think the most powerful thing is that we will continue to pursue a referendum. You cannot stand in the way of that. But it has gone from a referendum on a constitutionally enshrined voice to now a referendum aspirational of recognition within the Constitution. Does that make sense to people? You all with me? I lost you, Ivy. So things fall off the back of trucks sometimes, and I have seen the terms of reference for the 3 groups that Ken Wyatt has established. And part of those terms of reference forbid any discussion or consideration of the Uluru Statement. Now, I've seen that in writing, in the terms of reference. So in other words, what was delivered by the people at Uluru 3 years ago is now completely off the political agenda, and yet I believe honestly and deeply that we as a people, Australians, are ready for this. But can you imagine if a referendum goes forward on recognition within the Constitution, not the constitutionally enshrined voice, but recognition within the Constitution, there will be a no case run. And it will probably be a no case run by some Aboriginal leaders who believe that we should be pursuing what Uluru was about. And if there is a no case, there is no way that a referendum would be successful. You wouldn't even bother. Plus there will be another no case saying by the Andrew Bolts of the world that are already practicing this, that this sets up Aboriginal people as having more rights than the rest of the community. It is a mess. So what is it that we can do collectively? I think the most powerful and transformative part of the Uluru Statement is a national process of truth-telling. That's what's going on here right now. That's what Susan's acknowledgement of country did. It told the truth. And the truth, we know, liberates. If we, as Australians, and I think we did some really good work in the reconciliation movement, was that we're able to pursue a national process of truth-telling, it would transform us as a nation. And you see some amazing examples of it already. I don't know if any of you have been out to Mile Creek, to the memorial there. Now, the story of Mile Creek it gives me goosebumps. Mile Creek is out near in the Guarda area in northwestern New South Wales. And Mile Creek is a memorial, there's a memorial that's been created there with a walkway and interpretive walkway overlooking a massacre site. And the massacre took place on private land, and it was the first time, I think the only time, where the people that did the massacring were brought to justice. But what's remarkable is through the local government, through the people's relatives that were massacred, and the relatives of those that did the massacring have come together to create a place of healing for that land. Now that is tough truth-telling. That is tough truth-telling. I can't remember exactly where it is, but somewhere in the Eyre Peninsula down in South Australia, by one vote of the local government, there was a terrible massacre there where people were forced over a cliff into the ocean. And there was a huge debate, and you know what the debate was about? On what to put on the plaque.
Near my home.
What's the name of the place?
Just desperately trying.
Yeah, it's the Eyre Peninsula. Yeah, Seduna, yeah. So the debate was whether or not you'd actually use the word massacre. I mean, really? And by one vote, it was decided at the local government, in the local government, that truth would be told. And we all have that capacity. We all have that capacity. And it's empowering. And it's transformative. So I think that despite whatever happens within the political arena, we have to hold on to what is embraced in the Uluru Statement. And we can do that at a personal level, you can do it at a political level, you can do it within your workplaces. And you can do it personally. And that is, as you do, or you wouldn't be here, acknowledge the truth of our story. And that is an incredibly powerful thing that you can do. So what do I think is going to happen? And I'll stop after this. I think that by the end of this year, we will have a very clear idea of where things are heading politically. At some point, there is going to have to be a reckoning of where things are heading politically, but I'll have that fight. You know, might need to call on you, but I reckon it's about November, where we just say, listen, this is not what people ask for. This is not what the Uluru Statement says, but it's going to be a very difficult time. And I guess the other thing is that I'm not sure if I should be sharing this with you, but I'm going to. Cone of silence. Remember that, Maxwell Smart? Some of you are far too young for Maxwell Smart. So I reckon where it might end up is that they'll draw up the legislation for a voice to the government, not the parliament, to the government. So the question for people like myself will be, what do I say to Shadow Cabinet about that? And if that is the case and that goes ahead, it is a step along the way to realise Uluru. I think you have to be very pragmatic about some of this stuff. So we can have the greatest ideals in the world, and we hold it true to those, but recognise that change is always incremental. And I suspect that's where we'll go. We are going to be informed by the co-design process. and I have been as constructive as I possibly can be in terms of where Ken Wyatt and the government are going on this. I think I have a responsibility as an elected member to reflect what you say, but to also take forward what's best for the Australian people, in particular First Nations people. I might stop there. I think perhaps I could go and talk all day, but that's not the aim of this morning. But I hope that, has that outlined to you where things are at? Is it clear? Great. So maybe best that I get some comments and questions from you. And I know that Eddie, how old are you, Eddie? About 32, oh my God, so long ago. And I know that Eddie's going to respond, but maybe some comments and questions if we've got time.
Linda, I thought we might have Eddie speak and then have questions
Sure.
from the floor for both of you, if that's okay.
Is that okay for you? Oh, good, great.
Thank you very much, Linda. That was enlightening, and we're certainly very keen, I think, as a group to ask some questions and make comments shortly. But before we do that, I'd like to formally introduce Eddie Synot. Eddie is the Centre Manager for Indigenous Law at the University of New South Wales, and is spending a bit of time between Brisbane and Sydney at the moment as he transitions from work that he's been doing at Griffith University to the University of New South Wales. Eddie's a prolific contributor on matters to do with Indigenous law. He's a regular writer and contributor to The Conversation, and has had several appearances on the ABC program The Drum. So we're very fortunate to have Eddie come and share his perspectives on the Uluru Statement with us here this morning. And in addition to giving him a warm round of applause, perhaps we should sing a little bit of Happy Birthday. What do you think? All together, 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Eddie. Happy birthday to you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Where to start? Thank you, Susan, earlier for your acknowledgement of country. It's something that always hits very close in a gathering like this as well. But to hear from you and to express that, so I'd like to mirror that acknowledgement and of the traditional owners of where we are today, and also other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Linda, it's fantastic to finally meet you in person. I think, of course, like most Australians, we know who you are, but especially most blackfellas definitely know who you are. So it's fantastic. And thank you to the organisers, Dean and Ros, for inviting me here today. There aren't too many better ways to spend a birthday speaking about the Uluru Statement from the heart. It is one of my, it is my life at the moment, professionally and personally, very much committed to it. So that's why I'm in Sydney. It's why I'm at the University of New South Wales to work with Professor Megan Davis. That's been such a pivotal part of this process since, forever. But she was on the expert panel to begin with back in 2012. She was a key member of the Referendum Council. The Uluru Statement is with us at the moment. I apologise. I probably could have brought it with me today. I didn't even think about that. I had it with me yesterday with Rachel Perkins at Newtown High School. We did an event yesterday. But yeah, apologies. Next time, maybe, for something. I'm a Wamba man from Deniliquin, around that area. So my family from Cumragunja and Moonacalla. So I grew up around there. Born in Queensland though, so go the Maroons. Sorry. We're slowly transitioning down here. There was a lot I wanted to say, following from what Linda's was talking about. There's a lot of other things that have come up as well. So technically I'm a lawyer, so I could bore you all to death with the constitutional specifics and the kind of things that I research around that, which I don't think too many people need to hear or understand sometimes. But there is that key point in there about, and Linda made reference to it, why the constitutional enshrinement is so key. You know, there's the experience that we had with ATSIC, where we had our self-determining body, which was a compromise itself, you know, from the heyday and the promise of the Hawke years around treaty and national land rights and everything else. You know, the length and the extent of engagement with the Aboriginal community to form ATSIC, let alone to get it through Parliament and then to engage with it from there. So there's that entire history. But there's also a broader history when we think about constitutionalism, about what the Constitution actually is and what it says about us as Australians. So some of those people, Andrew Bolt that you mentioned, the Institute for Public Affairs, if you're unfortunately familiar with them, they have a campaign at the moment which has a website and everything called Race Has No Place. And it's based on these very kind of simplistic ideas about equality and the special rights for Indigenous peoples, and that the Constitution shouldn't be racist, even though it is, and it has the race power, and that's how it makes laws for us, that's how it supports the native title, it's how it's made laws for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people since 1967. But there's a broader history and something that I look at in my research about what constitutions and constitutionalism is. So it's not just the written text, but it's the broader kind of political, social, cultural institutions of Australia and who we are as a country and a nation. And for too long, from the very beginning, from the things that Linda was talking about at the beginning as well, I noticed up here on the wall, 1832, which is an important period in our history around this country as well. That constitutional story of Australia has been missing a fundamental part, and it's still that unresolved relationship today that's at the foundation or the core of who we are as a country. And I think you can read that, you know, implicitly in all of these denials of our rights still today, of the things that the Institute for Public Affairs talk about when they talk about, you know, no special rights based on race or anything like that. They're not able to understand or recognise Indigenous people outside dated concepts of race themselves. They're not able to understand the rights that we have as political and cultural entities. That Indigenous peoples all around the world have and have been recognised, whether it be in international law, domestic law, within their constitutions, within their state bodies. So we very much are an outlier in those fields, and that's something that we, you know, continue to work through, and that the Uluru Statement specifically speaks to in those three key reforms that Linda was talking about. So the voice to Parliament, definitely to Parliament, not to government. We shouldn't need too many reminders of what can be hidden in government with sports rorts going on lately. The Indigenous advancement strategy in many ways has been an abject failure since its introduction, and you know, I encourage you to look into that. The Guardian's been doing some reporting on it lately, but if, you know, you're interested in what's happening with sports rorts, well, the Indigenous advancement strategy has been a $5 billion sports rorts for the last, you know, 5-6 years. And Minister Scullion into the last election, but before that, previously throughout his entire tenure as well. And so this idea that we can tinker, as the current minister has said, within existing structures of the bureaucracy to be able to achieve what the Uluru Statement from the heart is talking about with a voice to Parliament. Perhaps I can be a little bit more forward in some of my criticisms, but it's just absolutely ridiculous. And I'll talk a little bit about that kind of stuff as well. So the voice to Parliament, there's, you know, some criticism from some out in the community, from our own community as well, that it's not enough, you know, it doesn't have enough power or enough bite in the recognition that it does do. But again, what I was talking about with that constitutionalism aspect and how that spreads out into the broader kind of cultural and political institutions of who we are. The very fact that we would have that legal recognition in the Constitution of First Nations and the recognition of that right to have a voice and to have a say and for it to be heard in that process would carry so much more powerful weight than, say, you know, an outright racial discrimination clause or something like that in the Constitution as well. And that's what the Uluru Statement was based around and developed from. Across the 13 regional dialogues, when Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people got to have their say in that process, they weren't interested in the racial discrimination clauses, in amending the race power, or in prohibiting a lot of those different things. It was about having a say in their own affairs based on their own ideas and understanding of who they are as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The second, or the most important part that came out of that too, was the treaty and truth-telling. Treaty and agreement making, which has always been a mainstay of, you know, of our community and of our activism to be able to achieve reform in this country. And And then the truth-telling aspect, which Linda spoke to, was something that organically came out of that process as well. So it wasn't part of the suite of reforms that was taken out to the community, but when the community members came into the dialogues, they wanted to be able to speak about their truth in their local communities. They wanted to talk about the stories that Linda was saying about how, you know, this word was only being able to use because of one vote on the council, or in how other areas, local governments were, you know, stopping that truth from being told. How the settler story was still very much being celebrated and not spoken about, with the massacres and everything else that go along with it. And there were some areas in the country where people are still alive today to talk to those things that happen, especially in the Northern Territory and North Queensland as well. So that's a very important part of how that technical constitutional change has so much weight outside of the Constitution itself, about who we are as a country, as a culture, as a society as well. In my research, I spend a lot of time reading kind of what other people might consider boring, irrelevant colonial records. That's why this date stood out to me. So the 1820s, Lachlan Macquarie, which I'm sure everyone knows, very infamous for various different reasons. But I'm writing a paper at the moment about a particular gentleman called William Hutchinson, who got a land grant in the 1820 something. It was from Thomas Brisbane anyway, and it was just after Lachlan Macquarie had left, and it was for the entire area of what is basically now Waterloo, Alexandria, those kind of areas. It became a very important matter in the 1880s in a case called Cooper and Stewart. So the Coopers had inherited all this land because of their business dealings and everything else, and something that's probably very familiar to everyone today. There's these arguments in this case about Sydney property prices and who was paying for what and what was being dispossessed and who should get compensation. But the thing that really interests me in all of it is these narratives about dispossession the whole way through. And there was something that you mentioned at the start, Dean, as well, about, you know, this existing people and culture, you know, our people and culture that were already here, that all of this has kind of been developed from and over the top of. And so whilst there's this narrative of dispossession which underpins this case, there's the class stuff between the working poor and the rich Coopers who have got all these free land grants back in the 1820s that have now become wool barons in the 1880s. But all, you know, underpinning all of that is this original dispossession which still hasn't been addressed and still hasn't been spoken to in the nature. And it's that dispossession that still underwrites, for me, arguments over property today. You know, we still haven't sorted that out. So people say, you know, and we talk about it not necessarily being relevant to other areas of, you know, what's going on at the moment. 250 years this year of Captain Cook too, which I think, you know, we probably would have heard a lot more about from the Prime Minister if circumstances were a bit different, considering the bushfires and everything else. If you're so inclined, you can look at his maiden speech to Parliament, and about a third of that speech is all about Captain Cook and this year being a celebration of 250 years and what he was going to do for it. So it was well planned in advance. But all of those things, nothing in this country happens without it being underwritten or underpinned by that dispossession of Indigenous peoples. And until we can address that and really address that seriously and meaningfully, not by symbolic recognitions in the Constitution, that Linda was talking about, that the Uluru Statement has, you know, entirely rejected, that said, you know, that is not what we want as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. You know, there was this invitation to Australian people to walk together through serious reform to be able to continue on. So until we're able to do that, that part still underpins everything that we do in this country. And I think, as Dean was saying at the start, it's important to remember that and to remind ourselves in community about that as well, about the responsibilities that we have to one another and to others to be able to address that and to be able to carry that forward. I think a couple of things on some of the political stuff as well, from my perspective, and as Linda noted, it's been very concerning to see the terms of reference that have been leaked or fallen off the back of the truck for the current kind of process that's happening with the voice to government. And it is a voice to government. Myself and my colleagues have been calling it a whisper to bureaucracy. And there's an important, you know, thing behind that too. And that's nothing necessarily against the minister himself. He's a former bureaucrat. I think a lot of the people that are involved in the co-design process are former bureaucrats as well. But the problem for me and for my research is that a voice to government within existing structures as it is being designed is what we already have. We have a minister, the minister himself has said that he's still the most important voice where he can channel that information back to. That was Nigel Scullion's position as well before on the Uluru Statement and the voice. Why would you want a voice when you have Nigel? But it answers itself. But there are important technical, things, principles that we used to hold, I think, a lot more importantly in this country with regards to our democracy and the way that it works as well. And sports fraud is another perfect example of that. Indigenous advancement strategy is something Indigenous communities have been fighting with for a long time. We had a National Audit Office report back in 2015, I believe. It found that there were at least 300 applications that were just lost, that never got through for consideration. Same with the sports frauds issues. Applications that were ranked as highly as possible didn't get a consideration, whereas others that should have failed were picked up on the minister's patronage as well. And there's a lot of questions about, particular members of government being members of clubs or associated in other ways with some of those areas. This particular money is something that is, Indigenous advancement strategy. It is supposed to be for the advancement of Indigenous Australians. One of the clearest examples of that, and that Linda and her colleagues were very strong on in Senate estimates last year, was Minister Scullion giving money to Northern Territory fisheries associations to fight native title claims. This is what is wrong with a voice to government. A voice to government doesn't change anything. The government should be accountable to Parliament. Parliament is where accountability is, where the transparency should be, and it's where our voice should be heard if we're going to be able to affect that broader change that we're talking about in the culture, the society, the traditions of Australian society itself. To begin this process also, there's something Linda mentioned also about removing or prohibiting any mention or any recommendations from the co-design groups about the Uluru Statement and the Makarrata Commission. One of the key things that the government has been able to do though is to adapt all of the language about voice, about co-design, about empowerment, about recognition. So if their new agency they have, the National Indigenous Australians Agency, they've got a team in there called Recognition and Empowerment. It's just that recognition and empowerment is a whisper to bureaucracy and it doesn't do much else. Yeah. To begin the co-design process, and if we look at co-design from a legal point of view, from a best practice point of view about what it means to be able to work with community, what the regional dialogues that built towards Uluru Statement actually meant, it means actual on the ground time, resources, engagement with the community to be able to determine membership of those groups. For the minister and the way that the government went about this co-design process, they handpicked a national leadership group. So co-design from the very beginning starts off as the minister's preferences again. There was a complete dismissal of the mandate and authority of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, to the point where the minister often believes that his anecdotal conversations he has with members in the community are more important than a deliberative dialogue process that has produced, this wonderful document that we have, this invitation to the country, that is the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So they're the things that I think we need to be able to, keep strong on and remain, keep in the forethought of our mind as we approach these political timetables that Linda was talking about as well. So the Uluru Statement from the Heart is very specific. It's not it could have been one of the things that we've done previously before. It could have been a list of grievances. It could have been all of these things that talk about the horrible things that haven't been addressed in this country. But there's this magnanimous kind of invitation from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through the Uluru Statement from the Heart. It starts by referencing our strength of connection and our history to this country, and then it's an invitation to join that. You are now all part of that as well here in Australia, and that's what should be reformed and recognised. It goes on to talk about the disempowerment that's happened and the process of why that is so important, and the structural reforms, how deeply embedded that disempowerment is in our country and our institutions, and why that is important to be able to be addressed for us. And then it goes straight to that point about the Constitution and why it's important to have it there. We call for the establishment of a First Nation voice enshrined in the Constitution. And then the very next part is the Makarrata Commission. It's very important too to remember that the Makarrata, from the Yolngu word, isn't just a feel-good reconciliation thing. From an Aboriginal perspective, it's a legal institution itself. It's a coming together, it's a process, it's an accounting, it's a reconciliation There has to be a process. There's agreements that come out of it so that society itself and so that Yolngu society itself can continue and can go forward and to be able to live together. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Ever since Makarrata came to the fore, nationally in the 70s as a word that was representative of that, I've heard from some of the people that were originally involved, Malcolm Fraser liked it because it was better than treaty, so it didn't scare so many white people. But there is serious meaning behind it, and it's why it's part of that. And it shows the strength of the authority and mandate of the Uluru Statement itself as well, and the understanding that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have of our place and our position in this country and where we want it to go, where we want to go to being responsible to one another in this shared space. And I think that's summed up perfectly in that last line about walking together in movement of Australian people for a better future. So I've heard similar things about timelines and everything else, where the government's heading. I really don't understand how you can design legislatively something that's going to have any weight or work in any real way before November this year and have it ready to present, let alone what's happening in the government, with the referendum timetables. But as Linda laid out, these are all things that are coming up. So if they do want to go to this symbolic recognition referendum, they do have to have the legislation introduced. There was talk that they may try and change the machinery of referendum legislation before that to try and make things a bit easier or whatnot. But I know from the people that I'm involved in that carry forward the work of the Uluru Dialogue, we would definitely be voting no and running a no campaign against symbolic recognition in the constitutional referendum. It does nothing, it changes nothing for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's so representative of what a lot of poor reconciliation in this country has been. It hasn't been meaningful, it hasn't been substantive, it hasn't delivered any serious changes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So we're 100% committed still to the mandate and authority of what the Uluru Statement from the heart is. It's fantastic, with Labor's involvement and their commitment, especially since the National Policy Forum in Adelaide before the last election. We can all, if only the federal election had gone the other way. What's wrong with you, Australia? But we're 100% committed. And there is this other thing that people talk to me about, timing as well. So outside of the political realities, but where are we heading with this too? We are the oldest culture and civilization in the world. We have been here for a long time. We've been at it for a long time, but our people are also dying. That is the reality of what's happening in our communities. No tinkering within voices to government, bureaucracy, whispers to bureaucracy, anything is going to do that. So there is an immediate need, but we can also wait out as well. And so that's the strength, I think, of this movement. It carries forward from conversations like today. You take it out into the community, you have conversations with other people as well, you explain why it's important for you and for this country as well. And I think, as Linda was saying, the majority of Australians are on board with this. And I believe the majority of Parliament is as well. It's just not the majority of Parliament that's actually in government and in control because of the Craig Kellys and all those kind of people in the world that are in the Liberal Party and some of the Nationals. I think I'll probably leave it at that. And yeah, thank you.